Hey, welcome to the webinar, 3 Rhythms of Leadership. I'm glad you made the decision to join me today because in this webinar, what we're going to do is we're going to give you some tools that are going to give you the ability to make sure that a good portion of the knowledge and experience is being passed from the baby boomers to your younger employees before the baby boomers are gone from your workplace forever. Close to 2 out of every 5 tradespeople are boomers. That's 40%. That's a large number of people who are in the baby boomer generation. That's a large number of people who are going to be leaving our trades with their experience and with their knowledge. In a report from Lincoln Tech, June 13th, 2016, it says 62% of firms are struggling to fill skilled trade positions. Baby boomers are filling just over 5 million of construction and extraction jobs at that time already. 32% of manufacturers making $1 billion or more are going to lose $100 million in the next few years because of these challenges. Well, the solution that they propose is a good one. And what they're suggesting is that we fill these positions as the baby boomers retire with younger employees. We need to be very deliberate about attracting younger people to our trades. A great idea. I love it. We need to. And we need to work hard at it. But it also, in fact, leaves us with and creates another problem. Well, what's this other problem? Well, there's going to be a knowledge and experience deficit as a result. As a result of us losing the baby boomers and hiring and bringing on and training younger employees and younger leaders to fill those roles, there's going to be a deficit in the corporate knowledge and experience that we have as a result. You see, the boomers have over 4 decades of experience. It's not just about basic knowledge. It's about how to apply the knowledge to things like problem solving, to understand and know how the pieces of knowledge fit together and work together. It's about leading and managing job sites, projects, or shops, and manufacturing floors. This is where that knowledge becomes very important, and we can't lose it. But this experience and this knowledge is disappearing fast. The next 5 years, it will be all but gone. Well, what's the result of this? Well, we're going to be making mistakes that we made 20 years ago because we don't have the ability to draw on the experience that we started accumulating 20 years ago. We're going to see profitability start to decline. There's going to be a shortage of skilled people, and this is going to be one of the biggest problems and continuous challenges that we face in trades. We're going to be dealing with disappointed customers as they've become used to a great level of customer service that's not going to be there anymore, at least not for a time, unless we do something about it now. That train is coming, whether we want it to or not, and whether we're ready to or not. It's like standing on a set of train tracks, and a train is coming. There's only one thing we can do is to get out of the way. And this train is coming, and it's going to create problems for every company that's not prepared for it. Well, this sounds pretty dismal if that's where we're going to stop, but it doesn't have to be. My name's Todd Reimer, as I told you in the intro. I'm the founder of Boots on the Ground Coaching. We're an organization that trains leaders in the trades. We focus exclusively on companies in the trades. And after more than a decade of observing, researching, working hands-on, and finding solutions, we at Boots on the Ground have a way to significantly reduce the effects this brain drain, we'll call it, is going to have on our and your companies. There's 3 keys to transferring this knowledge between generations. Or we can think of it as 3 rhythms of leadership that are going to help give us this ability. So where I live in Saskatoon, in Canada, between 2005 and 2016, we faced a significant economic boom. We were able to enjoy the effects of a boom in every commodity that we produced in Western Canada. And some of us at Boots on the Ground Coaching, we owned our own companies during that time, or we managed other people's companies during that time, or we coached other people's companies, the leaders and the management. But we all saw the same cycle happening again and again. Number one, there was a need for skilled and unskilled tradespeople. And so secondly, what happened is we would hire people just because they were a warm body and we needed to fill a slot. And that led to number 3. We struggled with costly mistakes and accidents because there wasn't the experience or the depth of knowledge that those positions needed and warranted. Now, we can't pass experience on. That's impossible. That's something that we all carry with us because of the things that have happened to us or that we have done. But we can pass the knowledge on that comes from that experience. You hear that? We can pass the knowledge that we gain from that experience on to the coming generations. You see, successful people in every field don't just learn from their own successes and failures, they learn from other people's success and failures as well. That's a way less painful process of learning. Rather than waiting until I learn all the hard lessons myself, I can watch someone else touch the proverbial stove and pull their hand back in pain and realize I don't need to touch the same stove without actually having touched it. I don't have to touch it to learn the lesson. I can watch and learn from someone else. We have the opportunity to learn from someone else's successes and failures, on someone else's dime, in other words. We can be ahead of the curve on this one. Not everyone will be, though. The companies that are looking and planning ahead are going to meet the challenges ahead. They're going to be prepared and ready to step into the gap left by the other companies that weren't ready. Well, how would that be if you could do this? How would it feel? What would it look like if you would be ready instead of panicked? You were in control and you felt in control of what was happening and you were ready for the changes that happened instead of being panicked. How would it feel to be able to seize the opportunities that come as other companies struggle to meet the challenges that they're going to face when their boomers in their workforces are retiring faster than they can replace them? What if you were able to focus on growth instead of just getting your bills covered? Well, it would feel pretty good, actually, if any one of these 3 would happen, and especially if we can make all 3 of these a part of how we do business. I've experienced both being prepared and not being prepared, and I prefer being prepared, just like the rest of us. Every one of us prefers to be prepared, to be ready for the unexpected, and to meet it with confidence so that we can progress and grow during the times of challenge and not just worry about paying our bills and getting by. So let's step into the 3 leadership rhythms that we need to transfer knowledge between the generations. The first rhythm we want to talk about today is communication. We talk a lot about it. There's lots of seminars and workshops about it, but we're really not all that sure how to implement it well. We don't always do a good job of it. We can talk about it and think about it and hear about it, but we don't always implement it well. How would you define communication? Well, usually we see communication as leaders from this perspective. The information passes one way, from us to the people we supervise. We're passing information that we know to the people who need to do the job that we're supervising. I'll tell you what needs to happen, and I'll tell you what I want you to do, and then you'll do it. That's often how communication is understood. And so we think the clearer we are about what we need to see happen and what we think should happen and what we want people to do, that's the clearer and the better the communication is. And to a point, that's correct. But the thing to remember is there is a leadership hierarchy, for sure. There are some people who are accountable for more things or different things, and there are people who are supervisors and people who aren't. But this is a faulty way to look at communication. Communication needs to be two-way. Communication needs to go back and forth. How does most information flow in your organization? Is it the same as how I just described, from leader to employee? We often view the information coming from the top as the most important. But when we do this, we miss so much that can help our companies. Here's an example. I had a reoccurring problem with one of my crews, and they did a lot of residential re-roofing on houses and some commercial as well, but mostly homes. And there's a recurring problem that was popping up on a number of houses. And so I had a choice. I could tell them, here's what I thought the problem was, and here's how I wanted them to fix it. I decided to try a little bit different approach one day. And so we were sitting down for a meeting, the whole crew and myself, and I asked them, I said, okay, here's the problem we're dealing with. Here's what we're seeing almost every job. What do you guys see? What is the solution from your perspective? Because I understood and I realized that they saw the problem about 1.5 feet to 2 feet away from their face every day. Whereas for me, it was further away because I wasn't there doing the work with them every day anymore. What happened was they came up with some really good solutions that were very effective in fixing the problem, and they came out with them right away because they had been thinking about how do we deal with this problem. I gave them the opportunity to communicate back to me what their ideas were, and we came up with some tremendous solutions to the problem we were having. You see, two-way communication is crucial to develop as the norm in our companies. It just needs to be expected by people that communication is going to happen two ways. Some of our old employees feel that younger people should just do what they're told without a lot of questions. Here's the reality to that way of thinking, though. There's two realities to that. The first is, it's true at times. It really is. Sometimes there's critical timing, there's pressure, and things just need to get done right then, and there's no time to explain why we're doing it this way and to explore whether there's a better way to do it at that time. We need to just do it. And the employees that we're supervising need to just do what we're telling them to do at that moment. It's not the time for questions. But secondly, the second reality is we learn more and understand more when we ask questions. Our employees are way more engaged. And if our younger employees are able to ask questions, appropriate questions at the appropriate time, they're going to understand more and learn more when they're able to ask these questions. And we answer them with some patience. The solution is communication. When we teach our baby boomers how to let younger employees know that they can ask questions, number one, but secondly, that there's an appropriate time and place to do that, and that doesn't mean it happens every time they think it should, then we need to teach both our baby boomers how to let younger employees ask questions so that they can learn and understand and grow in their ability in our trade. But we also need to teach the younger employees how to communicate effectively and clearly at the appropriate times. Here's a bit of a side note when we look at the millennials and the younger generations. Teachers can't fail students in many places in North America. The reality is they just literally can't give them a failing grade. There's teachers I've talked to who have said if they've assigned a paper or an essay that's due in February and the student does not hand it in until sometime in mid-June, just before school closes for the year, the teacher still has to mark it and give them a mark. They can't give them a 0 anymore. And students can't be held back a grade. They can't fail a grade anymore. Parents are getting mad at teachers for handing homework out to the kids every day because the students are so involved in extracurricular activities that the parents are upset when teachers give homework to the kids. People are seriously addicted to our phones. We're distracted. And this includes the younger employees, definitely our younger employees coming into the workplace. Parents are calling bosses to complain about the unfair treatment, if in their minds, of their children. A lot of the younger people coming into the workforce have very short attention spans. It's very difficult for them to focus on anything for a long period of time. Is all this how we would choose to have it? Well, probably not. But the reality is it is what it is. And we need to help employees take responsibility. We need to help them fail and get back up and learn. We need to help them understand what it takes to succeed with us, what it takes to get promotions, what it takes to get raises. This is all part of effective and clear communication. We need to help them to understand what it means to focus on something for more than a few minutes at a time. All of these things take good, strong communication from us, their leaders and their managers. Communication is so important that at least 4 of the chapters in my books, More Than a Hammer, Leadership Tools for the Trades, Part 1 and 2, deal with communication skills in one way or another. And the courses and training that we at Boots on the Ground Coaching conduct include significant amounts of focus on communication skills. All right, so the first rhythm we need to build into our companies is strong two-way communication. The second rhythm is clear expectations. We need to lay out clear expectations for the people we supervise. My 13-year-old son has been talking for several years now about building a raft. And so I had some old dunnage lying around, some old lumber, and I said, okay, let's build it this weekend. So what we did is we drew a rough sketch, and he had a rough sketch drawn out over the last 2 years of what he wanted it to look like. Well, he built it. We did some of it together. I showed him how to measure and screw the wood together, and it actually turned out really well, considering what it was. It was a raft built for 13-year-old boys to use on a slough. It was not a $60,000 Lund fishing boat. The expectations were clear. He can be proud of his work, of his raft, because he's a 13-year-old boy and he did a lot of the work himself. It's made out of rough wood. It's a little bit twisted and bent, but it works. It does exactly what he needs it and wants it to do. The expectations mean that he's done a great job. He's met the expectations because he understood what the expectations were. He learned how to use an impact. He learned how to use a circular saw, how to measure, and how to fit things together, and how to design a raft like this. Now, would the expectations be the same if he was working in a Lund fishing boat factory? No, there would be a different set of expectations. There's a picture on the screen of a Lund pontoon boat. The factory where they make these, they don't use drawings on the back of a napkin to show the people, their employees, how to build them. They have a set of engineered drawings, extremely detailed and extremely precise. The expectations are different. And the employees there understand it. They're not building a raft, they're building a pontoon boat. They're building a Lund pontoon boat. Here's how we help younger employees understand why they need to learn from the people who have massive amounts of it. What about when we hear these words? I know that. I don't need to be told all this. I already know. See, the only way an intelligent, engaged, conscientious, younger employee can say this is if they don't understand what our expectations are of them. Because if our expectations are they're always going to be learning, they're not going to say these words. Now, I did say intelligent, engaged, conscientious employee. If they're not these things, we can try to help them get there, or we can find someone who is modeling these characteristics. But even with this, they're going to feel that they know more than they do if they don't understand what we expect. The only way for people to believe that they know more than they do is if they really don't understand the expectations. Well, here's how we need to lay out the expectations. Number 1, we need to do it clearly. Number 2, fully. And number 3, specifically. Here's what I mean. To lay out clear expectations, to do it clearly, we need to ask 6 questions. What do we need done? And what would come underneath this would be things like quality, production, safety. These are the 3 legs to the stool, basically, is what I call it. These 3 are crucial. We pull one away and the stool falls over. We are not going to be effective as a company if we don't have high quality, strong production, and a great safety program with good results. So what are our expectations regarding these 3? So the first question is what? And then how? How, when we say what needs to happen, how is it going to happen? How do we expect it to happen? What are the tools we expect them to use? And what are the processes they need to use? Then we need to answer the question when. What's the timeline on this? Are there deadlines? Are there hard deadlines? Are there deadlines a little bit loose? What are the consequences if these deadlines and the timelines are not met? If our employees are used to having the ability to stretch the timeline in school almost to the breaking point, they're going to try to do that and assume that they can do that in our workplace as well. We need to be clear. A deadline is a deadline. It's hard. There's no moving on this. And number 4, the fourth question is, by whom? Who's going to do what we expect? Where are they going to get help if they need help? Who is the supervisor and the person that they're directly accountable to during this process that we're asking them to engage in? Where is it going to happen is the 5th question. Is it on-site or off? Is it in the shop? Is it in the office? Where's it going to happen? And last, number 6, is why. And often we get tired of explaining this. If you're a parent, you understand what it means to answer the question why 100 times every single day. It doesn't matter what we say, the response is always why. And sometimes it's not that much different when we're dealing with new employees. They ask why a lot. But this is not a bad thing. At least if they really want to know, it's not a bad thing. If they do, why wouldn't we want to tell them? It's an opportunity to help them see the bigger picture. If someone asks, why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it in this manner? Why can't we do it this way? Why did you say this? Why with these people? Why in this location? We can help them get a bigger picture and a greater understanding of why we do what we do. Secondly, laying out clear expectations means we need to lay them out fully. I talked about a napkin sketch regarding my son's raft. Laying expectations out fully is not just a napkin sketch, something that we sketch out quickly on the back of a napkin in a restaurant, but it's complete if this is what we're wanting them to produce. It all depends on what we're going to be asking people to do. If we're asking them to build a raft, for example, well, then a napkin sketch is just fine. Or a back of a piece of plywood. It's just fine to sketch out what we want done. However, for building a $60,000 to $80,000 Lund fishing boat, we need a detailed engineered drawing with specs in place so we know exactly what's going to happen and what order they need to happen in and who's going to do what and what the materials are and on and on. We're going to be very specific. We're going to tell them fully what needs to happen. What result are we looking for in the people we're supervising? This determines how much information we're going to give. And the third thing we need to make sure we're doing as we're laying out expectations is being specific. Here's what I mean. We need to be specific, for example, for things like what grade of bolt should they use? What should the torque be on those bolts? How clean should the vehicle be after the oil change? Do we mean inside the vehicle where people sit in the cab, or do we mean underneath on the oil pan, on the various steering and suspension components that might have oil on them? How clean do we expect it? How do we fold the wires in the electrical box for an electrician? Do we have a specific way we want them to fold them? Exactly how tight the connections on the pipe should be. We need to be very specific. What are our safety expectations? They're specific for different situations and depending on the job. We also need to show, not just tell them, what we're asking them and what the expectations are that we're laying out. If people don't have clear, full, and specific expectations laid out by us, we can't be disappointed if they don't meet them. The baby boomers need to pass on the knowledge, and the same ideas go for them. If they're not clear in how they're laying out expectations, in how they're teaching, and if they're not doing it fully, and if they're not being specific, they're not going to be effective in teaching the younger generation what they need to learn. Now, once we've laid out these expectations clearly, we can measure people's performance against these or relative to these expectations. This is a whole nother level of setting expectations. I take a full chapter in More Than a Hammer, Leadership Tools in the Trades on just how to measure people's performance relative to these expectations we've laid out. So the first two rhythms we talked about are communication and setting out clear expectations. The third rhythm is accountability. Now, we've already talked about how a lot of students aren't able to fail their grades. They're not able to fail papers. When I say able to, I mean able, because often it's in our best interest that if we don't know what we're doing, if we haven't put in the work, we need to fail so that we can learn what it's going to take to succeed. But they're coming into our workplaces without having had this advantage. I remember when we were kids, were younger. They were probably 4 to 6 years old. And they played soccer for a couple years. And they were out in the field playing, and the kids, they run around as a group in those years, and it's more of a social event. But when the kids would come off, their shift was over, and new kids would go in and play, the kids would sit down, and I overheard a number of the parents saying, "Oh, the score doesn't matter. The kids don't care. It's just about having fun. The score isn't important." Until I listened to the children. They were discussing between themselves who scored, how many they scored that shift, and what the score was. It mattered a great deal to them. There wasn't accountability when it came to scoring. It mattered. But coming out of high school, a lot of students are not used to accountability. Baby boomers need to hold younger people accountable for what they've been teaching them. It's not just telling them and hoping they get it, but it's holding them accountable. The question we need to answer is, how do we do this effectively and productively? These are extremely, extremely important questions. How do we normally think of accountability? Well, often we've thought of accountability as the negative. Excuse the language, but giving somebody shit. That's how we have typically thought of accountability. Here's the real definition of accountability. It's holding people to the agreements they've made. Now, one more time. Accountability is holding people to the agreements they've made. We're not springing anything on them. It's not a surprise. They're not add-ons. They're a part of the process. You see, the people we're holding accountable know what we're holding them accountable for on the front end, and they've agreed to meet those expectations because we've been clear. They understand because of the first two rhythms, and they've agreed to meet these expectations. They've agreed to be held accountable. Accountability is more reminding than it is enforcing. You get that? Accountability is more reminding than it is enforcing. We're drawing their attention back to what they know and what they agreed to do or not to do. We can't hold someone accountable to something they either didn't know about or didn't agree to do. The way we often think of accountability is not the most effective way. It's not just the negative. There's a number of examples about this. Yin and yang. It's two sides of the same coin. There's two edges of a sword. Same sword, two edges. And what I mean by this is there's positive and there's negative correction and affirmation. There's the positive and the negative when it comes to accountability. Often we focus on the negative. How do we tell people what they're doing wrong? The correction. And we forget the affirmation, the positive side of things. The affirming someone for doing something right, catching them doing something that they should be doing and doing it better than expected, or even meeting the expectations, is way more powerful than just relying on correcting them, telling them what they're doing wrong. But we need to know how to use correction effectively as well. So let's start with correction. Here's where you are. You've made a little mistake, or you didn't complete it, or you did it wrong. Well, it's important for you to know where you didn't measure up to the expectations. If I'm your supervisor, you need to know where I see you didn't measure up to the expectations. And along with that, what and how you need to do differently next time. You see, there's three components to using correction well. We help them understand where they failed, definitely. Here's where they haven't met the expectations. And we need to help them understand what the objective is moving forward. What are we expecting next time? And third, what are the action steps we're asking them to take to make sure that they don't make the same mistake again? Now, how do we use affirmation effectively? Well, what I mean by affirmation is not standing in front of a mirror and saying, "I am hot and sexy" 20 times every day. That's not what I'm talking about by affirmations. What an affirmation is simply this: looking for what someone is doing right and meeting and exceeding the expectations, and then telling them that they're doing it, that we've noticed. You see, looking for what someone is doing right, how they're meeting or exceeding expectations, and then telling them that we noticed and that we appreciate it. But there's three keys to using affirmation well. Number one, it needs to be real. It can't be made up. we can't make up things to affirm somebody for. They need to be real. They need to be practical. They need to make sense. And secondly, they need to be significant. They need to be meaningful. It shouldn't be just minor little things that are meaningless. And third, we need to be consistent. Not only once a year when we do a yearly evaluation, but consistently. And this is true for both affirmation and correction. Our yearly evaluations should not be the only time people hear what they're doing right, and should definitely not be a time when we go into everything we think they're doing wrong. Correcting people should happen regularly and consistently, and so should affirmations. When we tell people what they're doing right, it needs to be done consistently. Accountability reminds us of what we agreed to and lets us know how we're doing in relation to it. In More Than a Hammer, Leadership Tools for the Trades, I devote more than 2 chapters to covering how do we do this well. This is something that we often don't do well, and it's a tool that we ignore to our own detriment. So the 3 leadership rhythms to efficiently and effectively pass on knowledge from one generation to the next are these 3. The first rhythm is communicate. We can never do too much communication. Secondly, we need to lay out clear expectations. And third, we need to hold people accountable, both in a positive and a negative way. The correction and the affirmation. If we put these 3 leadership rhythms into play in your organization, you're going to get ahead of the curve. You're going to effectively be able to pass on knowledge from one generation to the next. Now, not everyone is going to be wise enough or take action on this like you're going to. And they'll pay a high price. A price that you won't be paying. Now, we've touched on these concepts rather briefly in the last 45 minutes. But in my book, More Than a Hammer, I expand on them significantly. Click here to get access to a more in-depth look at these and other tools for leading in a changing environment that we're in right now. www.morethanahammerbook.com. Now, these books are both written specifically for trades. Well, what do I mean by that? How can a book be written specifically for, say that these 2 books are written specifically for trades? How's that even possible? Well, there's 3 ways. Number 1, they're very practical. They're relevant to your situation, and here's how that happens. There's 2 questions at the end of each chapter that help you take the material and the principles that you've read about and learned about and apply them to your situation. The examples and the illustrations are drawn directly from men and women who lead in the trades. Secondly, they're to the point. Each chapter is short. They're to the point, and you're going to get the information quickly. It's not going to take you half an hour to read through a chapter, 15 minutes max. And third, there's a QR code. It's one of those little square boxes with squiggly lines in it that you scan with your phone. And it takes you to not just a website, but it takes you to a video. And you'll be able to watch the same material and listen to it instead of read it if you don't feel like reading it that day. I have a video that I put in between 5 and 8 minutes for each chapter that covers the material from that chapter. So if you don't have time and you just need to listen to it while you're driving without watching it, you can do that. If you're sitting at home, if you're sitting at coffee break or at lunch and you want to share it with someone, you can watch the video together. This is going to give you the opportunity to gain access to the tools that are not only going to help you with passing on the information and the knowledge and the experience from the baby boomers to the coming generations, but it's going to give you the ability to lead effectively regardless of the situation you find yourself in now. The more we develop ourselves as leaders, the better we will be able to respond effectively to anything that happens or comes up in our companies or organizations that we're leading in. This is your opportunity to invest in yourself and the other leaders around you. So click on the link below, www.morethanahammerbook.com, to pick up the number of copies that you need to influence the men and women who lead in your organization. I've enjoyed our time together, and I hope you've had some principles here and some tools that you're going to be able to take away to help you pass the crucial information, knowledge, and experience from one generation to the next within the next 5 years. Good luck, and I'll see you inside More Than a Hammer, Leadership Tools for the Trades.